I challenged myself to find a motorcycle for a good deal and buy it. Take the bike on a memorable trip with my girlfriend, then clean the bike up and sell it for a profit to fund the trip I just went on, covering all my expenses from hotels and fuel all the way to insurance, therefore returning my bank account back to its original balance and rendering my trip free. In the first episode, I went shopping for a bike that fit my overly specific requirements, and after evaluating all my options, I ended up with this Blue Whale for only $5,400, a 2013 BMW R1200 GS with 67,000 kilometers on it. I then took it for a shakedown ride or two to make sure it was fit for the task at hand, which means that it's now time for the second phase of the plan. The trip itself. The whole reason I'm doing this challenge, because I've never been on a proper motorcycle trip before. Today is the day that I've been waiting for and that we've been working towards. Today is the day that we take the GS on its trip, and my first real motorcycle trip. Everything we need is in that box allegedly, and a backpack on my back, but I might get into that a bit more later on. We just filled up for the first time and we're ready to go. Not so fast. Did you really think I'd just leave home without a plan? Did you not learn anything about me in the last episode? I really enjoyed the comments from the people who think that I'm overcomplicating and overthinking this. The ones who said that I should just get out there and ride, not even take my girlfriend with, or book a place to stay. Have you guys never met an overthinker? You're right, I am overcomplicating this. You might be able to go wherever the wind takes you, but I need a plan. First of all, we have to consider our budget. Remember, I bought the bike for $5,400 and I reckon I could sell it for about $6,000, which gives us a budget of $600. But I've already eaten into that budget with fuel, insurance and getting the title for the bike, leaving us with only $434.19 remaining. And planning the trip is similar to choosing the bike. There are quite a few factors to consider. The most important question is where. My first thought was to go to the sea. But the further I go, the more fuel I'll have to pay for. Game reserves are plentiful in South Africa, but I prefer bike spotting rather than animal spotting. Another option is the mountains. About 4.5 hours from here is a mountainous region called the Drakensberg, which means Dragon's Mountains. It seems like a good distance, not too far, but not too close either. And I like mountains. The next question was for how long? This was easy. My girlfriend is taking the Friday off work so we can have a weekend away, but she has to be back by Monday. It's not long, but it's probably all our budget would allow for anyway. So now the trick is to get the most out of our remaining budget, while leaving money for fuel, food and toll gates. Technically, if we camped, we could stay much longer because it's cheap. But remember, the goal of this trip is to be comfortable, enjoyable and free. And camping is anything but enjoyable in my opinion. This is a hotel I used to go to with my parents when I was a kid, near a mountain called Cathedral Peak. I already know that it's a beautiful place, and another reason that I like this idea is because the price includes breakfast, lunch and dinner. So although we would be spending quite a big chunk of our budget in one go at $170 per night, we at least know where we stand. We wouldn't have to then figure out food on a budget when we get there. So $339 later, our location, duration, accommodation and food were sorted. But that left us with just $95.19 remaining. This might be harder than I expected. So I tossed a spare pair of underwear in the top box and my girlfriend filled it up the rest of the way while still complaining that there wasn't enough space. And 2 minutes from home, our first road trip expense was already upon us. Okay, our range says 311 kilometers and our distance to where I want to stop is 268 kilometers. Seems about enough. I suspect the range will climb as we get to our cruising altitude. In this first stint, we're not looking to win any races, we're looking to get out of the city. Since I decided to leave at 8 AM on a Friday, we first had to navigate some traffic to get out of the city, but I didn't let that dampen my spirits. And it didn't take long before we were past the traffic and onto the straight road that at the time I didn't realize went on forever.
Hay bale.
But I found a way to entertain myself.
I do absolutely love playing around with all the electronics. I mean, I've never been a huge advocate for electronics, and now all I do is play with all the different modes. And like, I've tried the soft suspension and I'm like, oh, it's not quite as good as the normal setting. So now we're in normal. It obviously has a setting for 2 people on the bike, but we're not the heaviest 2 people in the world. Look at all these peasants needing fuel. It's not as economical as a GS.
The straight road continued, but it did gradually get a tad prettier, first with bushes sprucing up the place, and then with crops on either side of us.
Corn. That looks ready to harvest, baby. I would know. I've played Farming Simulator.
With my farming tips flowing freely, we then stumbled upon a challenge.
Warning, average speed prosecution. Is that a challenge? Who can set the fastest average speed? That sounds like the Isle of Man. I'm in.
This road was the #1 reason I wanted a bike with cruise control. Yet that was the one feature I missed. But it wasn't as bad as I expected.
Thank you. Okay, well, I made a meal of that because it needs Face ID to access your cards, obviously, your Apple Pay. Now, you can't see my face. Okay, that's 1 toll. How many to go? Who knows?
Luckily, it was the first of only 2 toll gates, so it didn't eat into our budget too much. But it was around this point that I realized I'd forgotten earplugs. And I felt pretty bad because I'd promised my girlfriend earplugs a few days earlier.
Oh my god, it's a corner. This is exhilarating. Oh god, and after that, more straight road. I say it like I'm ungrateful. I'm having a great time. It's a beautiful day for this. Last night we got a little bit of rain, which, I mean, don't get me wrong, we need the rain. We've been in a pretty bad heat wave, but I was terrified that it would rain into today and ruin today, because you can't really plan the weather on the trips, but you have to book in advance. So I was relieved to wake up to this absolutely beautiful day. It doesn't get better than this.
After about an hour, I stopped to check in with the girlfriend and see if she wanted to keep the GS or buy the new 1300, assuming she gets a second job, of course. And she already had a sore butt, which wasn't a good sign for the GS.
Okay. Oh, I suppose let's put the kickstand up here. That works better.
It also wouldn't be a successful trip without getting pulled over. But I was so charming.
Morning, officer, how are you?
Not to mention legal as so he had no choice but to release me.
It's starting to heat up a bit now. I keep sticking my toes out into the wind to catch a bit of the breeze, and it's really good. It cools them down. And here we are. The best place to stop if you go from a road trip on this specific road. A very specific criteria, but trust me, I'll show you why. I want coffee and probably some petroleum. That's gas for you Americans. Let's start with that, shall we?
Standing up felt like a reward, and the GS looked like it had barely broken a sweat. But I was wrong about my favorite place in the world to stop on a road trip. You see, the coffee was fine, the chicken strips were fine, the electricity was sufficient to charge my camera batteries. There were even older and wiser GS friends.
Yours looks better than mine.
Lots of them. The ostriches were creepy, and we successfully refrained from having a picnic. But the #1 reason I came here was missing: the trampolines. Since I was a kid, I've come here purely for the trampolines, and now they're gone. You can even see where they used to be, so I left in a huff.
Okay, bike's full, I'm full. Let's get back on the road. So from here, we're only about 2 hours from the hotel, so we're just over halfway. But that sounded boring, so I found some place along the way that has a viewpoint or lookout point over a dam called Stokefontein. It looked kind of pretty in the photos, so I figured since we got some time to spare and we're going past it, we should probably go have a look, see if we can get a cool photo of the GS, because that's obviously my life's mission.
From this point, I really enjoyed the ride, even though I couldn't make out anything on my phone because of the glare. but we got off the main highway and onto something more relaxed.
I do love being able to stretch my eyes, as my mom would say. It's nice. I like the expansiveness. And this is our off-ramp already.
I didn't even know what the speed limit was because I hadn't seen a sign since I turned a few kilometers back. But this road felt less rushed, and this was probably my favorite part of the trip. The truth is, I feel conflicted about touring. On those boring straight roads, I long for a car. If I could have just started the ride here, I would have been happy. Times like this made me want to buy a fancy modern adventure bike, but the bad parts made me want to buy an R1 that I put on the back of my truck and drive to nice roads instead.
I found it. This isn't where the GPS is taking me, but I found it. It's really blue. I've never even heard of this dam. And I live here. And there's cows. Wow, those cows have a great view. I'm not sure I trust where the GPS is taking me. I put in the viewpoint. Maybe, I guess there's more than one point where you can view the dam technically. I hope the one I'm going to is the good one. That one looked quite nice, but maybe it gets better, we'll see.
The GS came in handy at the viewpoint with its off-road prowess. And at slow speeds, the weight of the full tank, passenger and top box was very noticeable.
My Bigfoot's coming in handy.
For once, the GS wasn't the biggest blue thing in the vicinity, so I got a picture to mark the occasion, and then it was time to leave the kickstand down once again.
Every time. Bye-bye, dam. Well, that was worth a stop. I'm usually reluctant to stop places. It was just coincidence that I sort of had a look to see if there was anything else in this area. My main goal was just to get to that first stop at Harrismith, because I know those roads are a little bit more boring and annoying.
From here, things got prettier as we began our descent down the mountain.
This is the part I've been waiting for.
There's a famous quote that says, "Man cannot discover new oceans unless he has the courage to lose sight of the shore." It's basically a fancy way of saying that I've been missing out because I never stray far from home in the fear of things going wrong. It takes effort to do something like this, so I usually just don't. And this trip really drove that point home. On this stretch, I was forced to actually ride the bike, forced to change gears and use the clutch, and suddenly time ticked away so much faster. Even the wind cutting through the valley forced me to pay attention.
I'm not sure if you can quite make out the angle of the bike right now, but I'm having to lean quite heavily to the right to stay upright, or to go straight rather.
Then we came across roadworks or a landslide or something and had to take the off-road diversion. This is what I've been training for. But while waiting for our turn to go, I realized this meant I'd lied to you in the last video.
Sadly, I don't think there's going to be any off-roading on my trip.
He's entering the last stage of the Dakar. The first man ever to do it on a 1200 GS. Everyone else took a 450 because they're pansies. He wasn't afraid. They can see the ending.
What can I say? I had to find ways to entertain myself. I'm sure Toby Price would understand. By this point, I thought we would be in the mountains for the rest of the way, but we found more flat farmland. And it turns out I was right about the corn being ready to harvest, because we even stumbled over a combine harvester in the distance. The second thing bigger than the GS. It seemed like a nice farm with little trees, so I came up with a foolproof plan to buy the farm.
Okay, I'm going to start a Patreon, and you all donate, and then you're all welcome to come and play on my farm whenever you want. Sound fair?
I don't even want to talk about the next few roads, but the potholes kept me awake before we stumbled over a little village in the middle of nowhere.
You know, I often wonder if living out here like this is actually the better life. You know, I wake up and I'm concerned that I have to take the 1200 GS out here and not the brand new 1300. I worry if my footage on my iPhone 14 is going to look okay because it's not the brand new 15. You know, we have such pathetic worries in life and they're so materialistic. Like, no doubt these people have stresses, but I bet they don't have anything to do with the new iPhone. And they probably haven't even seen the new GS, which, I mean, I do feel sorry for them about that, but I have a point, you have to admit.
Not long after that, almost 400 kilometers from home, we were in the mountains. It was like they finally came into focus.
It's a freeing feeling being this far from home on nothing but your trusty steed, to be as cliche as hell. But seriously, it's satisfying. I like it. I see why people do this. Do I want to do it tomorrow? Not really. I'm glad I get the day off, but I would be lying if I said I didn't enjoy it. It really is, here comes another cliche, food for the soul.
And obviously, I had to stop for an obligatory photo of the GS in the mountains, because it was brilliant on this trip. It didn't put a foot wrong, and quite frankly, I think I picked the best bike possible.
Okay, this is pretty cool. We're 4 hours from home on this deserted private road with just the GS, my girlfriend, just the family, out in the middle of the mountains. It's really beautiful. The hotel's about 4 minutes that way, but the mountains are behind us, so I had to spin the GS around just to get a quick photo because it looks cool. A GS amongst mountains is more appropriate than an R1, even though an R1 is obviously prettier. Okay, final stretch.
So I spun it back around and immediately bumped into some monkeys.
It's my spirit animal. Hey bro. That guy would ride a Super Duke for sure.
By now, we were both ready to be off the bike, with sore asses and a lack of earplugs catching up with us. This is how we'd been riding for the past 4.5 hours, with my massive camera backpack sandwiched between us. It's not ideal or comfortable, but where there's a will, there's a way. Finally, we made it, and it turns out the GS had shielded us from quite a few bugs. We were immediately greeted by a creature and found our room, which coincidentally was Toprak's race number, which has to be a good omen, right? Technically, it was a room with a view if you went looking for it. After riding in 36-degree weather, our first stop was the pool, that also came with a complimentary mountain view. This hotel is popular for hikers because there are loads of trails you can walk. I am by no means a hiker, but I do love pretty walks. At least, that's what my Tinder profile would say. So we picked out a short route and made our way to Lake Jared. Eventually, we got lost a few times, and turns out there was a trout farm right next to it. By the time we got back to the hotel, it was dinner time, where I got to be my own waiter since it's a buffet. I think I did a good job though. And just like that, it was the end of day 1. In the morning, I checked on the GS, who was a tad damp, and ate this whole plate of mini croissants because if they're mini, they're half the calories. This was our only full day here, so we had to choose our walks wisely and headed off on a hike to a waterfall called Doreen Falls in the morning mist that was hiding the mountains. They say living by a big body of water is relaxing, and I think mountains have a similar effect. There's something satisfying about being dwarfed by these huge pieces of earth, and it didn't take long for falling water to appear through the trees. The best part was this cave section behind the waterfall, and apparently this is the universal signal for crabs. This guy was friendly, this guy not so much. We did another walk later that day, but other than that, I put the cameras away for the rest of the weekend before doing the whole trip again in reverse.
So that was the big trip, done and dusted just like that. And to be honest, I couldn't have asked for a better first motorcycle trip experience. But now it's time to see how we stack up financially.
Once we take into account the hotel, fuel, lunch stop, and toll gates, surprisingly, we have a whopping $12.82 left over.
Honestly, when I saw that we only had about $90 when we left home, I really didn't think that we could do this. But to my surprise, we actually came in under budget. So far, we've ticked all the boxes that we can. It was as comfortable as can be on the GS, and it was without a doubt enjoyable. So all that's left to do is to clean the bike up and see if I can sell it for $6,000 so I can get my money back and tick the free box too. But I'll leave that for the next video. Let me know how you would have spent your budget, and I'll see you on the next ride.